There are two ways to view yourself, photo or mirror. Photo is how we wish we would look. Mirrors are how we really look. One is fantasy, the other is reality. We can fix our hair and our makeup for a photograph, but when we look into a mirror, that is the real us. Until we see and acknowledge our real self, we never understand our need for God. In other words, if our lives are constantly overinflating ourselves, we undervalue our need for a Savior. Welcome to the 260 Journey. We're looking at Acts 25 and a very overrated moment here. It's men seeing their photo and not looking into their mirror. They've overrated themselves. Paul is on trial and about to go to Rome, but not without some overrated people showing up to see the little man that is changing the region with the message of Jesus. Let me read to you one verse. The contrast of people is amazing. It's Acts 25:23. So on the next day, when Agrippa came together with Bernice amid great pomp and entered the auditorium, accompanied by the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. So think about this. You have the king of Judea, Agrippa, his wife Bernice, Festus, the procurator of Judea, and there are the commanders and the prominent men of the city, all in this one verse, but there's one other person also. In the midst of all this pomp, you had one little man in chains that is changing the world, and that's the Apostle Paul. All of these other people have looked at their photo and decided, what a great man am I. Paul looked into a mirror and realized, what a great sinner I am. And the latter man changed the planet. It says they came amidst great pomp. This is an interesting word. Pomp is the Greek word fantasia, where we get the word fantasy from. The photo, their photo, is a fantasy. In the Daily Study Bible by William Barclay, he describes the fantasy like this. There is no more dramatic scene in all the New Testament. It was with splendor that Agrippa and Bernice had come. They would have worn their purple robes of royalty and their gold circlet of crown on their brow. Doubtless Festus had donned the scarlet robe which a governor wore on state occasions. Close at hand, there must have stood at Agrippa's court, and also in attendance were the most influential figures of the Jews. Close by Festus, there would stand the captains in command of the 5 cohorts which were stationed at Caesarea. And in the background, there'd be a solid formation of the tall Roman legionnaires on ceremonial guard. In such a scene came Paul, the little Jewish tent maker, with his hands in chains, and yet from the moment he speaks, it is Paul who holds the stage. All of these people are overrated. God's opinion is all that counts. Think of the contrast of having a tent maker in chains and a king in purple, and people forgetting that the man in chains is really the man in authority in that room. This story made me think about Mother Teresa speaking at Washington, D.C. prayer breakfast some years ago. I read it in an old book by Andy Stanley. Let me read to you what Andy Stanley wrote. Skeptics threw rocks at her theology, but never her character. On February 3rd, 1994, Mother Teresa came to Washington, D.C. and spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast at the Hilton Hotel. 3,000 people were there, most of them officials of D.C. The president, the first lady always attend. In this case, it was Bill and Hillary Clinton. The Gores were there also. It became intensely uncomfortable is when Mother Teresa started with these words. But I feel the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because Jesus said, if you receive a little child, you receive me. So every abortion is the denial of receiving Jesus, the neglect of receiving Jesus. Silence, cool, deep silence was all around for 2 seconds. And then applause started on the right-hand side of the room and spread and deepened. And now the room swept with people applauding, and they would not stop for what I believe was for 6 minutes. But not everyone applauded. The president, the first lady seated within a few feet of Mother Teresa on stage were not applauding, nor was the vice president. They looked like seated statues at Madame Tussauds. They glistened in the light and moved not a muscle, looking at the speaker in a determinedly semi-pleasant way. Now Mother Teresa is now perhaps schooled in the ways of world capitals, and perhaps did not know that having said her piece and won the moment, she was supposed to go back to the airless, dramatic assertions on which we all agree. Instead, she said this. Mother Teresa now spoke of fighting abortion with adoption, telling hospitals and police stations and frightened young girls, please don't kill the child. I want the child. Give me the child. I'm willing to accept any child who would be aborted and to give that child to a married couple who will love the child and be loved by the child. Perhaps she did not know or even care that her words were, as they say, not healing but divisive, dividing not only Protestants from Catholics, but Catholics from Catholics. It was all so unhappily unadorned, explicit, and impolitic. Mother Teresa seemed neither to notice nor even care. She finished her speech to a standing ovation and left as she entered in, silently through a parted curtain in a flash of blue and white. She could do this, of course, because she had a natural, unknown authority. I love that story. I love the images it evokes. It looks like Acts 25. 3,000 Agrippas and a little apostle named Paul. Imagine it, a tiny, slightly slumped over woman standing on a box so as to allow herself to be seen over the lectern, addressing some of the most powerful men and women in the world. And packed into that aging frame was enough authority to lay low anyone who dared to raise a finger in opposition. You tell me who was the most powerful person in the hotel, in that Hilton banquet hall that day. You tell me who was overrated. Thanks for joining the 260 Journey.